that we got all the other things out of the way, another question. I know we're in COVID times here, and things are a little bit different. So, what might be, and I think Axel, you kind of spoke to this earlier. Um, what might be some earlier? Well, do campuses have like early awareness systems, or are they sending information to instructors, to provide some type of early awareness, early awareness systems, so that faculty or staff might be able to report if a student might need some mental help, or be able to refer that student to mental health. Um, are staff on campus considered mandated reporters if they see that a student might be having some problems, or might be exhibiting some issues, or needing mental health? And that's just kind of a follow-up question for that. And then I guess we'll just go with the first question. Are there some early awareness type of interventions, or not interventions, but literature or frameworks being put in place with instructors, so that they might be able to see the student needs help and know what to do currently, especially in, like I said, in the COVID era? How does that work?
I could speak to that just for a moment. This is Lisa Sethre-Hofstad. At Concordia, we started about a year ago training faculty and staff on mental health first aid. It's a licensed program. We sent a person to get certified to be a mental health first aid trainer. We've had a number of different small group sessions with faculty and with specialized groups of people like coaches or music ensemble directors who travel with students, to equip the campus to recognize signs, to know what to do and how to respond, to provide that extra support. It's been pretty successful for us, and we are now moving into some targeted student populations and other populations on campus. So for example, our nursing students now, during a particular point in their curriculum, are trained on mental health first aid. For us, I think it's partly just equipping the campus community, to recognize signs, to know what to do, to know how to respond, and to create kind of a network of support, no matter what the role is in the students' lives, as an introductory way to be able to respond appropriately to student needs as they emerge.
With what Dr. Sethre-Hofstad is saying, we do get warnings, right? Early warnings. If I am an advisor and I have about 30 somewhat students whom I advise, and we immediately get notification from the various classes, faculty from the various classes that the students are enrolled in, saying that he or she or they are not doing their work, right? And could that be a sign? According to what Dr. Hultgren said earlier, that could be a sign, right? That could very well be a sign. But I also want to be mindful about what Axel said, right? Sometimes it is just sheer busyness, right? Sheer exhaustion that people are under, that they are not showing up in completing their work. So as an advisor, we are encouraged, and I don't do a really good job. I'm trying, right? But to reach out to the student and just check in and say, hey, what's going on? But where I fall short of, right, is that when I don't have a relationship with the student, because not all advisees do come and see the advisors on a regular basis, and that's when I fall short. The people I have a relationship with, man, they will show up, they will ask and show out if necessary, right? And we can work things through. So my hope is that with this question, Marcio, is that we talk about the importance of having that type of deeper, wider relationship across campuses. So.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Raj. Would anyone else like to chime in on that question? Maybe Axel, have you experienced Any have you are the campus that you attend currently? Are you aware of any early awareness interventions or programs that might help students dealing with mental health?
Yes, and first, just to kind of like, I guess back up what Dr. Raj just said there is, I think that's a very important thing to highlight of addressing these needs for students is really not just a matter of expanding resources, it's a matter of shifting culture and expanding culture to be more inclusive to these issues. So just to back that up a little bit. As for kind of like early warning or sort of systems to catch this, I think the two things that come to mind for me are, first, there's that cultural aspect. You know, there's the informal kind of varies from instructor to instructor or staff person to staff person of like, what kind of relationship do you have? You know, the sort of accommodations within a relationship, and especially now, I think during COVID, you know, faculty are even more mindful of kind of that accommodation and just the collective exhaustion, because right now the entire world is feeling it. But then kind of on a more formal note, there's my college has something called a care report that a staff or faculty member can fill out on a student to just kind of like note, hey, I'm seeing these red flags, and that refers them to our counseling department for a follow-up and maybe some meetings. You know, I would flag that, to my mind, a limitation there is just kind of an understaffed and overworked counseling department. I won't take us off into the weeds on that, but yeah, that framework is present, at least to an extent.
Okay. Well, that's really good to know. And hopefully those types of frameworks are being practiced at other campuses as well. If that's looked at as a best practice for making sure that students, that faculty have an opportunity to refer a student that they might feel like the student's in crisis, but they have a place to refer the student so they don't have to try to negotiate that themselves. I'm sure that's really helpful. So thank you for weighing in on that. Excuse me. So next question, just, overall, what type of recommendations would you guys give to help a student focus on improving their mental health? And I'll just leave it there.
I guess this is Lisa. You know, a lot of the self-management and self-care strategies that we all should be using to manage daily stresses, and some weeks are harder than others, are many of the same ones that students also should use. And I think that part of our role developmentally for students as they are moving off on their own and living on their own in new ways is to help them develop those behavior patterns that will support the success that they strive for in college. So, you know, getting exercise, eating well, getting enough sleep, managing your time, all of these things are things that some students have had practice at learning and developing in their high school years, and other students have had less practice at that. And so the more we can help them promote the kinds of behaviors that we know will help support their success, I think the better off they will be. I've said to my staff many times, how well are we modeling that? So it's one thing to say to students, you need to be doing this and getting enough sleep and managing your time. And if we're running around frantic and haven't done many of those same things, we are not being good models for them on how you manage your adult lives. And so we've worked both with my staff as well as with our students on transition to college kinds of skills, talked a lot about things like time management, talked a lot about things like setting a sleep schedule that is consistent and regular. And those things are hard for college students. Their social lives don't reinforce those choices. And so they're learning, they're growing, they're trying to figure it out. And the more we can help them understand how important those things are, I think the better they will be able to manage the stressors that come their way and manage some of the mental health challenges that they experience.
Melanie Hultgren, just speaking up here. I would second a lot of what Dr. Sethre-Hofstad just said. I think engaging in self-care is a very, very, very important thing that we need to do to start improving and just maintaining mental health, right? So it's the physical activity, making sure you're eating and sleeping. I think especially right now, again, because we're feeling kind of disconnected, trying to engage in relationships that do feel safe and comforting for you in whatever ways feel safe and comforting for you at this point. Trying to engage in a hobby, you know, identifying something that creates balance in your life so that you're not just constantly trying to meet the demands and expectations around you, but you're also just tending to your own needs. So whether that could be anything, right? That's cooking, baking, journaling, reading, whatever, but just making sure that you're creating that balance. And then, of course, you know, ways to improve then continue to escalate into things like maybe reaching out to talk to someone, identifying other resources, just depending on what's going on and what you feel you need. But when I think about just basic, how do we make sure we're maintaining mental health? I would say we definitely start with self-care.
You know, thank you, Dr. Hultgren and Sethre-Hofstad. I want to just emphasize that this is not, when we talk about, you know, care, we cannot just say it has to be the responsibility rests on the student, right? The institution and institutions and systems have also a responsibility, right? And when you think about St. Paul, right? And just a quick example, right? A third of the city budget is spent on law enforcement versus the wellness and healing of the community, right? 11% or 12% of the budget of the city in Minneapolis is spent on law enforcement. So we are feeding and nurturing a compliant society versus a healing and a wellness society, right? So we have to really look at our budget and say, these are our values. How are we nurturing our values, right? It is good to have personal responsibility, but I think we also need to underscore that with our institutional responsibilities, and where we have lacked on that institutional responsibility. You know, Dr. Sethre, maybe you all are doing a better job than some institutions, right? When our students owe money, right, after one or two times of attempt to get the money back, what do as an institution? We send that to the collection agency. What are we doing? Right, as an institution, what kind of example are we setting for our students? Right, and now the students are getting calls from these collection agencies and being harassed, right, about how much money they owe. And we know our students owe a lot of money, right? Student debt these days, Axel probably will know, $1 trillion plus, right? That's a hell of a lot of money. And that tells me that we don't have an investment in the future and the nurturing of the next 7 generations to come. We're just simply trying to slap everybody with this idea of compliance and criminalizing, right? Just because you haven't done this. So I want to appreciate what Dr. Hultgren and Dr. Sethre-Hofstad has said. Right, believe in all of those things, right? I encourage people to go hug a tree every day. Love hugging a tree, y'all. It is amazing how much chemical trees put out that kind of calms our nerve systems down, right? And takes us out of that sympathetic nervous system and empowers the parasympathetic nervous system, right? And allows us to slow down. And work out, do relationships, right? But at the same time, I think we as an institution need to do that. We as an institution need to talk about what is happening in our community. Faculty cannot walk into a classroom and say, Chemistry 101, this is what we're gonna do, right? When I am living in these kinds of neighborhoods where my stress level is 3 times higher than a soldier returning from a war theater, right? And when you are in that type of PTSD and whatever, right, you may be a hell of a good student, but if those things are not addressed, that just compounds the impact, the idea that you are not valid, right? Your presence is not appreciated, right? You're not going to be seen. And if I do all of those things, that in itself nurtures mental health concerns in a student. So I want to make sure that we check our institutions as well, right? I'm sorry, y'all. I didn't mean to go on. Boom. Axel, all yours, man.
Well, I don't quite know if I can follow that up so well, but I hugely appreciate all the answers of my fellow panelists so far, and I don't want to have to just yield to redundancy, so I'll kind of expand on my thoughts here from a student perspective. First, on the front of self-care, yes, that is hugely important. You know, it's kind of like just this foundational element folks need to have in dealing with these challenges. And, you know, the consequences of ignoring or abstaining from self-care, they catch up to you, and they catch up to you bad. And I think from my experience and experience with fellow students, one important piece to keep in mind with self-care is that it's not about fighting against what you're dealing with. It's about sort of moving with it. You know, for example, me in my lived experience with PTSD, my brain works differently than it did before I developed PTSD. It doesn't work better, it doesn't work worse, but it works differently. And in self-care, I am far better served by recognizing that and going with the flow of it than in trying to function like Axel Kylander from 2015. And I think with that comes in some ways adjusting our framework both as students and just collectively as a society, adjusting our framework for how we build expectations around things. You know, the student experience in the 21st century is not the old, parents help you pay your way through college, you're in and out in 4 years, you get a great job, boom, done. That's not how it works. Sometimes you have to go at a different pace. You know, I'm in college longer than I expected to be, and that's okay, because life goes on, and I am figuring it out. I was actually having a conversation with a friend the other night about this, where they said, Axel, I've got 4 things to balance. I've got work, I've got school, I've got COVID, I've got my mental health. I can't opt out of COVID. I can't opt out of my brain. I need work to live, and I need to be going to school. But when I try to balance all 4 of these things, I can't do all 4 of them well. COVID's the constant, so between work, mental health, and school, I can either be working and doing well in school, and my mental health sucks, or some other combination there. So what we talked through was the brass tacks reality of it is like the healthiest thing for you and the most helpful thing for you is maybe look at dropping a class or something like that, and that's okay. That's not anything bad. That's not a failing of the student. That's a very important act of self-care, and my friend's going to be fine. So that's what I'll say about self-care. And I know I'm going on long, but I do have thoughts. So on the institutional side, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Raj, for bringing that up. I was thinking of that, but not exactly sure how to articulate it, where yes, there are tools each of us can use individually to address our mental health, but our mental health is not just our responsibility. It is a matter of our community, our society, to support each other in these things. And frankly, there's not at all to downplay the importance of self-care and other techniques, but oftentimes there's only so much we can do as an individual. So, the incumbency is not on a student to, get good at taking 10 minutes in the evening to have a cup of tea and read a book of poetry, one of my favorite things. It's how do we expand resources and support for students institutionally, whether that's through let's say funding to expand counseling departments, or where there's limitations there. Other states have great examples of very effective mental health partnerships with healthcare providers, located around the campus area, and increased investment in really a concerted effort to fight stigma and shift culture in the campus, because, we've all been to workshops. Workshops are awesome, but you can't solve systemic racism or homophobia or mental health stigma in a workshop, or even in 5 workshops. So just to kind of highlight some areas where I think there's always a need for institutional effort and not just students practicing self-care.
Marcio, I don't know about you, man. I think we should hire Axel.
It sounds like he's a great advocate. I want to say thank you guys for bringing that up. I know that in the recruiting process, we had admissions counselors on one of our calls about a month ago, and they talked about how they do a holistic review of the student. But it sounds like from an institutional level that we're seeing that institutions don't continue to look at the student as a whole student, and there are some gaps in terms of how students in engaging students in mental health and letting them know about resources that could be helpful for them. What do you think campuses could do to be more active in the process, or how could we marry, how could we engage students better around mental health? And then how can institutions start to indoctrinate a better culture around mental health, and then looking at their students as a whole person and not just a student that came to get a degree? How do you think we foster that in? What are some ways we can do that?
I will start, and then but here a couple of things that I would say, right? We have nurtured a golden standard of education, right? And by which I mean we have believed that if I teach the young person or the persons in our classrooms or in our community how to fish, they can fish for themselves. But almost always what we are recognizing in the current times is that we need to move into a platinum standard of education, right? Teaching people how to advocate for themselves in a way that is structural and systemic as well as personal, right? So this platinum education comes about as a result when students realize that they're going into a larger community that is experiencing all kinds of trauma, right? And how do they advocate for themselves, right? And we don't do a good job as an educational institution. We still are stuck in this 19th century educational system where we're teaching them how to fish for themselves, right? We need to be in this sort of, I want all faculty, I don't care whether you're a nuclear scientist or a sociologist, become an activist, right? Teach in that space where students are getting that juices all, riled up, because they're like, oh, not only am I learning how to fish for myself, but I also know when the river dries and when the river gets polluted, I know how to fight for myself and create a sense of community, right? And I think we need to bring that type of spirit into our schools, right? It has to start with first grade all the way to college and beyond. I also want to say that, inviting people to understand, as Axel said, right, this is part and parcel of who I am, right? We tend to promote ideas of heroes and sheroes and theros, right? Like men in tight pants with a hood flying around or with a shield, Captain America. They all look good in their tight pants, right? But that's the sort of like where the standards of like we tend to capture. The struggles are seen as sort of less than, right? And so we all try to shield ourselves from all of these kinds of difficult ways of defining ourselves. What Axel said is so beautiful in the sense that this is who I am. This is my humanity, right? I struggle with bipolar, right? That brother in Philadelphia struggled with bipolar. He has 7 kids. When he took his meds, he was, right, or affable. People loved him. People can talk to him, right? He has episodes, right? But when you call it the institution for help, guess what? That's another dead body, right? Dead body. So I think what I'm hoping is that we will understand what Axel was saying is that the struggle, right? The struggle is about understanding all of that I am, as opposed to being in this space of suffering, right? Then you wallow, then you get internally, right, depreciate yourself. But when I'm in a struggle, I'm along with so many other people in an institution that understands all of that struggle and is saying, hey, there's hope. There is hope. Here's how I am dealing with it, right? Not here's how I overcame it, but here's how I am dealing with it, right? So even there, we need to be mindful. Last but not least, right? Our body is an amazing machine, right? It has that sensibility of homeostasis, right? But then but if it is impacted with bombarded with so many trauma on a regular basis, right? Microaggression to racism on a regular basis, then that homeostasis is harder to arrive at, right? So how are we caring for them in our community, right? Again, forget public safety, y'all. Let us focus on public wellness. I'm going to shut up and pass it on to Dr. Hultgren because she's shaking her head.
I'm just in agreement with everything that you're saying, right? It's just increasing that focus and expanding that so much bigger than just one person in one situation.
In your perspective, Dr. Hultgren, are we doing enough on campuses to bridge the gap between seeing the student as just an undergraduate student taking courses and a whole person that has come into this space with, with some baggage that may not have been recognized or attended to? Are we doing enough in that space to marry those two and not have the student even feel like they're coming to a space that's just, that they're just to do, they're just to do academics and athletics and have a party?
Honestly, no.
Okay.
And that would just be speaking from my own experience, having been a student for many, 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 many years. But yeah, I mean, there definitely wasn't much focus on who is this student in my class and what are they bringing into this experience every day, right? What are they carrying with them every day that they show up in class, or when they're struggling, like what might be behind that struggle? There's not a lot of focus there. I mean, I remember just seeing maybe flyers around campus of like, do you need to talk to someone? There's a counseling center. Maybe I would see that flyer, but there's not, it's easily accessible information like, hey, we see you, or hey, I've noticed you're struggling. What's going on with you? Let's sit and have a one-to-one. There's just not a lot of, well, at least not from my experience, that wasn't really accessible. Even when that trickled down into a smaller group in graduate school, right? There's just not a whole lot of connection that's always made there. Now, what I can't speak to is what you do about that, right? Because I imagine it's really, really hard to be the professor to 200 students and try to single them out and make that connection every day. But yeah.
I guess, thanks, Melanie. One thing I would add to that is, we talk about it at my institution as a coordinated care network, and really trying to think about building on relationships, and that students have a network of relationships that care for them, and that network is connected to one another. Where I think we need to be really careful is how much students want that. So I think sometimes students want a little bit of isolation between some of the aspects of their life and their academic life, or other aspects of their college life. Some of them want that holistic approach and don't mind if different people know different things, but I think it can be a little bit individualized with students. I have some students that say, I just want to be, X in this space, and leave some other things into some other categories with other people. And so I agree that institutions need to provide the network, need to be the support. We need to reinforce good strategies. We need to help make it easy for people to make good choices and to provide the support when that's harder. I also think it can be easy for us to assume what students need and want and forget to ask them. And so I think there's a little bit of a fine line there that we try to walk carefully, but it's not always easy to determine where that line is.
I think, not to be a broken record, but again, all very great points. I think Dr. Sethre-Hofstad, to follow up on what you were raising there first, my thought from a student angle is, it's a great point, yeah, that as we approach this and work to improve these systems, never to make them intrusive. I know at some points in my struggle, I've been at a place where, I don't necessarily want someone's help or advice, but I do want their understanding. And I think that piece of making sure at the very minimum we are integrating that understanding into every level and layer of our institutions is important. And to kind of get at the capacity factor that Dr. Hultgren mentioned of a faculty member with 200 students, it doesn't just lie on the faculty member or faculty or counseling department. It's that holistic thing of faculty, staff, everyone in the campus community having that supportive element for each other. And something that I kept thinking about during Dr. Raj's answer and in the pitching of this question is, how do we get a system where a student's entire humanity is recognized and not just, it is not the act of any one person or people or collective that, just kind of the institutional machinery of how things work are a student becomes, a number among numbers building up to a bottom line, essentially. And in changing that, there is, I think, recognizing that a student is not the vacuum of being a person there for learning, because the real definition of a student, I think, is the past, the present, and the future. It is the past of what they bring into their learning experience and their life. It's the present of those things they carry and the additional things going on in the present. And really any student, whether they're a K through 12 PSEO fresh out of high school or a non-traditional student going back to college, they are the future. I'm going to be replaced by another student in my role next summer. Someday a student will have everyone else's job here. It's always the future. And I think that's really the key element of at least understanding the theory behind how we shift our institutions is this is in everyone's interest. It's not just, that person's struggling with depression and that person's struggling with anxiety and that's their problem. And I guess to get a little bit into the meat of a couple specifics there for, I know I mentioned some kind of like ideas I've had around resource solutions, but around cultural solutions, I think there's really embedding and empowering students in these conversations more on campuses. What's more impactful, a workshop or a panel of students telling their stories and giving some context and human faces to the struggle? And I think it's the conjunction of those two things, because a mental health expert can provide hugely valuable information and a framework for the conversation, but the students are, in that space, what give the topic flesh and blood and meaning and urgency. So I think it's embedding students in those conversations, not only to share those stories and build that understanding, but then be in the process of working to expand a campus's resources or approach to breaking down stigma and building community around the topic. Because as the people living with the challenge of being a student struggling with mental illness, they are a student is very well equipped to speak to what is needed.
Axel, Marcia, if I can, just one more point. I just want to say that, institutions of higher education or institutions of education have always been charged, as Axel said, right, as a place where we promote critical thinking. And as I stand back and I look at and feel these institutions, what I'm asking for us to do is to shift that paradigm, right? From critical thinking to critical consciousness. right? How do we get there? We need to be in that space of being in an institution, as a person, as practitioners, as faculty, right, as staff, to have a critical consciousness beyond critical thinking, right? And this might rub the wrong way. A lot of faculty are going to look at me and say, "What the hell are you talking about?" Right? But I'm really in that space where we need to be talking about healing and wellness, and for that to happen, we have to have a critical consciousness. So I'll shut up.
Thank you for that. I just want to reiterate something that Axel mentioned, that students come as a past, present, and future. I think that's really the holistic type of view that I believe campuses can move towards to be better stewards of helping those young persons navigate life through the lens of mental health, education, aspiration, all those things. So I want to thank you for bringing that to the table. Also,
so when I say Axel Kylander, you say for president. Axel Kylander.
Hey, so we did have a resource in the chat that was talked about. So as we talk about how schools engage students, the University of Minnesota does have a program called Mental Health Advocates. It's run through Boynton Health Services, and then they get the information out to faculty and students, and they also hold a multi-day training for faculty and staff to help with the continuing education of that piece. They also issue articles in the newsletters, stay on top of the resources for students and other staff that are that need coordination with may need coordination with mental health services. So I just want to let the attendees know that they're at the University of Minnesota. They're doing something to make sure that not only faculty, staff, and students are aware of resources on their campuses and can engage with those resources. So in that vein, just to say, since we know that there's a stigma of mental health, we know there needs to be some type of crosswalk between how campuses see students as a whole person and what they bring to the table, what they bring from their past into campus and how they behave in their present and how they develop their future. As we think about those pathways for students to engage on campus, and mental health being a critical part of that. And now that post-secondary education is changing, or now that education as a whole is changing and shifting to more of the distance learning or not in-person learning, and the level of engagement that students are having, what can campuses be doing proactively to try kind of usher in this age of, to use Dr. Araz's phrase, this age of consciousness in a virtual setting? Are there any campuses can do now, looking at the way that post-secondary education is turning to be more on? So what are some things that they can do to kind of engage and usher in this level of consciousness around student development?
Well, I have one very, very simple action that I think helps a lot right off the bat. I guess it's kind of a little bit more of a straightforward, literally on paper answer than a answer in theory like I tend to give, but something I've spoken about a lot, both at a campus level and at a system level, is that outreach to students, messaging to students on these topics is very challenging, especially in a virtual environment. How do you communicate in a genuine way about these things when you've got emails and texts, and how do you have a messaging of sincerity around that? And not only how do you have sincere messaging, but how do you make sure students are seeing it? Because students check their emails at different rates and different thoroughness. Students, etc. But the one thing every student is sure to look at is their class syllabus. And I think something that it's a small act that can make a huge difference in making space for students and for helping students feel seen and understood with mental health is having, a basic needs statement, a mental health statement incorporated into a class syllabus that it can be as simple as a couple sentences saying, hey, life is really hard. I get it. Let me know if like you need support in that area. Like literally statements as simple as that in a syllabus have made a huge difference for me in the past with knowing that an instructor is, on the same page or willing to get on the same page as me for getting help or at least getting a little bit of support to make it through that class. So that's just one very simple suggestion that I think could be widely adopted.
I like that. Any other suggestions?
I'm Axel, thank you for that. I'm proud to say that we do have a statement like that at Concordia that many people use, and it's continually getting refined and revised with student feedback and others just to make sure that it's effective and doing what it seeks to do. I will second and I was actually a little bit affirmed by your comment, Axel, that proactive outreach is challenging to students. For students, we've tried a number of those kinds of things, and it's been with very mixed success. We've had proactive series of different kinds of workshops, hands-on things to do, going into wellness classes, number of different strategies that we've tried to reach out to students in a more proactive manner, and they just don't respond very well. And we take that as we're not doing what they seek and what they want. It's just hard when students say one thing that they want, but then when you try to provide that, that's not what they show up for or how they engage. And so we're constantly trying to think about what's the best way to do that, trying to get feedback from students on how to be effective at that. And so I just appreciate, Axel, your comments today about learning more from students, and you just help reaffirm my commitment to just keep asking them and to keep working at it, because the reactive approach is sometimes what we have to do, but I certainly would prefer a more proactive, consciousness raising strategy if I could find one that worked really, really well with students.
So thank you. I will further share that it's time for institutions to stop functioning in their lanes, right? Collapse those lanes, right? Decolonize our thinking and engage our community. So Metro State doesn't have to have its own counseling department, right? How do I take my resources and pour that and share it in the communities and say, hey, let me hire some communities, community counselors, right? Some personal coaches, right? Why do all the CEOs who graduate from Harvard have personal coaches and not our families, not our students, right? How do I create an educational coaches who can kind of walk in the community, in the trenches, and help elevate people, right? In the classic sense of that word, the definition of affirmative action is to reach in and affirm their presence, right? As Tupac often said, right? Roses do grow out of concrete if we nurture them, right? So let's get out there, right? Y'all didn't know I was going to quote Tupac, but really getting out there in our community. So let us invest money in our community and not in our departments, and say, hey, let me share this wealth in our community and hire some of these community counselors who can work. And we know demographically where our students are coming from, geographically where a lot of our students who are coming from. Let me put centers there where they are accessed, right? They're accessible as opposed to waiting for this room in one space, right? Because of our overwhelming concern for anonymity and confidentiality. Also, want to underscore what Axel and what you are talking about, Lisa, in the context of creating a consciousness, a critical consciousness. We as an institution need to stop thinking about ourselves as the all, be all, end all space, right? We are just as messy as they come, right? And let us just be as vulnerable as possible so that our students are not walking into a perfect institution. They're walking into a messy institution that is just family, right? So appreciate it.
If I can just speak again for a moment, Dr. Raj, I think you brought up a fantastic point there about a campus needs to be a community. It needs to be a family. It can't be this pristine, orderly place because none of us are, and we are what make it. And I guess Dr. Sethre-Hofstad, to get, I guess to kind of follow up with the great point you brought up of the challenges with creating effective programming for students around mental health is, I've seen that on my campus as well. When I was president of our student government last year, I did a lot of work around mental health at the campus level and kind of saw the limits of trying to put together programming, getting student turnout. And I understand the feeling of feeling a little let down there, or observing clearly we're not on the right track. And I think from a student perspective, we can talk about just capacity and time for, I think generally speaking, students don't necessarily have time to sit down for an hour in an environment where they don't know what it's going to be, but a workshop, is generally sitting and listening, and not necessarily something that is going to seem helpful to them. Not to impugn workshops, because tons of workshops are very helpful. But I think then in that there's programming and workshops and wellness classes and that kind of thing. It innately has this pristine clinical connotation to it. It has a clinical element to it of, come to this wellness workshop where we'll talk about time management and self-care. And yes, it's humans facilitating the workshop, and it's humans participating in the workshop, but where's the humanity in the event going on? So something that worked very well on my campus that we adopted after research into examples from other states on how to kind of shift campus culture around mental health is just having support groups for students where it's student run, student driven. Let's just get together. We called it Let's Talk About It. We would get tacos from town, and we'd line them up on a table, and everyone would take a taco, and we'd sit down with each other and just talk about what's going on. And that kind of function where there's no, meeting agenda, learning outcomes of this next hour session. There's nothing like that, but it's just let's get together and talk about it and be vulnerable and have that openness with each other if that's something we have capacity for, and if it's not, at least the ability to sit in that space and hear from others, and with each such session, there's an increased understanding that filters out into the wider community of the campus that people get it, and it's not just you dealing with it, and it's all of us, and we can have that shared understanding and compassion with each other by taking that approach that emphasizes the messiness of humanity more than any orderly process of, if a person has this toolkit, then they will be more successful with the matter.
I would agree that support groups would be very, very helpful, especially right now where people are feeling alone, and to normalize, hey, other people are struggling too. And it might be something that could still be implemented in a time of COVID where people are trying to be distanced, and right. So I think that would be a great idea.
It's resource allocation, right, Doc? Allocate, put the money.
Sure.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Dr. Raj, but thank you guys for all those helpful resources that can be ways that students can engage and still, get what they need from, in recruiting through, outreach, through doing small groups with students. All those things can be valuable for students to engage with and start to have support in different areas, rather than just looking to one source for support. And so I think that those things are going to be very helpful for those who are listening on the call if they're on campuses and they need other resources. So thank you for sharing those. So we have about 15 minutes left. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I just want to let all the attendees know that the chat is open. If you have a question you want to drop in the chat, go ahead and drop it in the chat for us, and we'll get the question to the panelists. Dr. Raj, they just want to let you know that it's fantastic that you dropped Tupac in there. I did see that in the chat, so so shout out to you, Dr. Raj, and Tupac for that. One of the things is just before we close, what would you say is well, you don't have to just give one, but one of the questions that we kind of came up with as a group is for each of you guys to give them the most important resource that you think a student can tap into to kind of help navigate their mental health. And it doesn't have to be a campus resource. It can be out in the community or what. So what would be, if you had a college freshman going off to college and you want to say, listen, this is something you definitely need to tap into to kind of help you, navigate mental health while you're on campus, or navigate mental health when you leave our home. What's the one piece of advice you would kind of share with that student?
Just one piece feels so difficult.
No, I mean you can get more than one. You can get more than one. Dr. Hultgren.
I mean, I would imagine it would first start with just trying to build a community around you, right? That's trying to make connections, whether that's joining groups or whatever feels comfortable to you, just trying to tap into the community around you. Because for a lot of students who are moving away from their own community, their friends, their family, isolation is the first thing that kind of sets in once you head off to college. So trying to build a sense of community would be important to maintaining mental wellness. From there, I think you escalate up the chain, right? Identifying who around you in the university would be a resource if you need one, whatever. I mean, all universities have multiple resources, whether you're looking for assistance financially or mental health or whatever it is, identifying what your resources are, and then moving on again into the chain of, okay, if I continue to struggle, what's the next layer? So then it becomes, who do I reach out to for help? Whether that is mental health in the community, starting care with a therapist. There are many different ways to engage in mental health and therapy these days. That could be through text or whatever it is. So I think it's, there are multiple layers, and how do you do that?
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, Doc. I would say, in many traditional cultures, right, many indigenous societies often say our humanity is defined by these 4 chambers, right? The physical wellness, spiritual wellness, mental and emotional wellness. And throughout their time when students are with us and when we are part of the community, let us not let any of these chambers collect dust, right? Sometimes we tend to focus more on one chamber versus the other. And that in so many different ways will affect that being, right? So talking to people about, how are you nurturing your spiritual wellness? What are you doing to nurture your mental and emotional wellness? What are you doing to nurture your physical wellness, right? Not being perfect in any one of this, but because that's all our society does, right? It pours a lot of money in perfection versus being, as Axel earlier said, right? I just need to be, right? Be present. And so I would say, Marcia, to your question is to start talking to our students and the institution at large in terms of our, physical wellness, mental, emotional, and spiritual wellness.
Dr. Raj.
Well, in addition to the fantastic points already brought up, I would I guess, submit that for a student, if you have a support system you can trust, look to those people. You know, at least get love and understanding from them. You know, there have been dark points in my life that I don't know if I would have survived without my support system. But another thing I'd like to add there that I think is a really essential takeaway is sometimes people don't have a support system. You know, maybe you don't have a great relationship with your family, or you don't have a family really, or you don't have friends or a close-knit social group to turn to, or you don't know where to go external to yourself. And in that, I think something that's very important for any student is trust yourself, trust what you're feeling, trust that it's real, trust that it's valid, and follow the flow of it, and trust that it's okay to recognize that it's something you need help with, and seek out that help. Again, not that it should be entirely incumbent on any one individual to, you know, figure it all out by themselves, or, you know, figure out help all by themselves, but at least trust in that what you're feeling is real, and the impact it's having on you is not a personal failing, not a moral failing. It's what's going on with you, and it is okay to be facing that challenge and want to seek help for it.
Hey, thanks so much.
I would just reiterate what everyone has already said. Take the first step, find the person, cultivate that relationship, reach out, affirm yourself, surround yourself with people who care and who can help you make strong choices for yourself. What everyone has already said, I ditto 100%.
Okay, thanks a lot. We did have a question come into the chat. One of our attendees is asking, do any of the panelists have any suggestions for where to find funding for mental health services?
What we are doing is that as part of the NAACP and others, we are really pushing our cities, right, and counties that are supposed to do these human services, human health and wellness services, to be more focused on dealing with the trauma that our communities are facing, right? And not, again, don't put the money and the resources on compliance and enforcement. Rather, put the money in the wellness and healing spaces in our community. So I would say put pressure. This is voting season, right? Make sure you are making those phone calls and underscoring the need for this type of resources to be distributed in our community.
Any others with that might be able to shed some light on that?
Well, I guess just to back up what Dr. Raj said, I can't claim to be super knowledgeable on funding streams that aren't, you know, like the state legislature or something, but do take that step of advocacy, do speak out on this and on the need for funding for it. And, you know, I think one thing that's often helpful for people that exist outside of the student experience or the higher education space in understanding this topic is really putting it into context for why this is a matter of community concern, of public concern, not just of student concern, not just of a learning institution's concern. Students are the future, and supporting student mental health is a step in supporting community mental health, which is to the benefit of everybody.
Yeah, thanks. I would also say there's sometimes funding can be an issue, but always also think about expanding your capacity through collaboration. So there's always another opportunity for to engage with other entities or other organizations you're looking for. You don't have to find the funding to do it. There may be a way for you guys to collaborate and create programming that provides everything you need across sectors. So I'd like to offer that up. Any last words that anybody would like to share as we close out the call?
I'd just like to say thank you, Marcio, for facilitating this. Thank you so much to my fellow panelists, and thank you so much everyone for attending and everyone involved in putting this together. I really appreciated being a part of this and hearing people's thoughts, and I just appreciate the attention given to this topic.
Absolutely. Any other closing thoughts?
Likewise, I want to thank
Raj.
the Office of Higher Education and Dr. Hultgren and Sethre. All right, thank you, Axel, for president. Right, once again. No, I want to remind us, right, back in the days, right, in the good old days where I think Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five said, right, the song lyrics like lingering in my mind lately, right? It's something like, don't push me because I'm so close to the edge. I'm trying not to, right? Lose my head. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep going, keep from going under. I want to share that wisdom because, I mean, these brothers, these sisters and others from a music space, right, from using their songs and invited us to think about all of the pain and the kind of trauma our communities are experiencing. We need to really be paying attention to investing in that, right? Either resources in terms of money, but also in terms of commitment to say we want to help undo, right? I want to join organizations that are working towards the betterment of my community, right? Raise the critical consciousness of the institution and the community that I'm a part of. So I will part with that. So go out, let us all be in the platinum standard of education. Love y'all.
Thanks a lot. I'd like to, first of all, thank all of you for sharing your time with us this morning. I know you guys all have busy schedules, so I appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to serve as panelists or contact experts for our calls. And please do, at any time you want to join us on a call again to share your expertise, just let us know. But also join us if you just want to listen in on different topics. So I say kudos to you, Axel, as well as Dr. Sethre-Hofstad and Dr. Hultgren and Dr. Raj for all that you guys have done today for our attendees. So round of applause for all of you guys.
Hi, Marcio. This is Winnie. Can I just speak for a minute?
Well, I guess, yes, you probably already started that.
Hello, everybody. My name is Winnie Sullivan, Deputy Commissioner over at Minnesota Office of Higher Education. I didn't realize that we were coming to an end here. I was enjoying the conversation so much. I hate to hear us leave here, but I just want to thank the panelists for their words of wisdom. It was a powerful session, and I hope that all the students that heard this could really receive the messages. And I hope that it gives them some leeway on how to navigate through this journey. And although I know the session was really aimed towards students' mental health, I too received the message because I feel like we're all students of life, right? And just trying to figure it all out and just learning as we go. So thank you once again for sharing your stories, your experiences, and your expertise.
Thanks, Winnie, for sharing that. That's great. I just want to let everyone know before we leave the call that our next call is November 18th, and it will be part 2 of the American Indian Experience in Higher Education. So if you're able to join us for that experience, part 2 of that conversation, please join us. Calls always start promptly at 10 o'clock for 90 minutes. And so we want everyone to be a part of what we're doing here. So once again, appreciate everyone for showing up and listening. And I hope you were able to take away something that you can use to help you on your mental health journey. So I appreciate your time and see you on the 18th. Thanks. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.